Good morning.
Good morning.
Beautiful flowers. It's important to allow ourselves pleasure and joy and beauty. So take in that beautiful richness of that yellow and the white around it, and the greenery as well. Today, after the service, stick around. We're taking your picture. Right up here, I think. We'll figure out the where, but I think you're all going to stand up here with this backdrop, and I'm going to take your picture. This is for the search committee and for who knows what other uses, but we're going to do that. So, I better end the service with something really upbeat so you're like smiling. I don't know. Are you excited about hearing the survey results?
Yeah.
Yes. Good. Because you need to know what they are as you prepare for the settled minister who will come. Who will come. You know, I offer premarital counseling. No, this isn't a hint. Wait a minute. No, I'm just saying. I do that, and I do couples counseling also from a ministerial standpoint these days, not from my therapy world. But there's a survey that was developed by some religious folk and psychologists who may or may not be religious, I don't know. But there's a survey that they offer that I have couples take. So I know a little bit about the use of surveys and how they can indeed be useful, although I'm not particularly big on diagnostic tests for most people. This isn't a diagnosis, it's a survey. And what happens with that survey in counseling couples is they fill out a computer form independently of one another, like you filled out your forms independently of one another, right? And they fill them out, and then it goes into wherever the people are that kind of score it. And it's not number scored, it's just scored for where the couple agree and where they disagree on a variety of topics related to getting married. Not only are they looking at where the couple agrees and disagrees, and here's the important part, the 10% you're supposed to remember. They look for and point out to the couple and the person, like myself, working with them for a few sessions. It points out where the couple agrees, and that's a good thing, and where they agree, and maybe that's not such a good thing. You can imagine some topics where people agree on something, and it's not necessarily a healthy thing for the couple, for the whole. Can you think of some examples of what that might be? You know, if they believe, child rearing is one of the areas. Say they believe in whipping their child with a belt if they misbehave in a small way. Well, it's a judgment, one that I personally have, that's not a good thing. They can agree, but then we're looking at, well, they agree to something that we need to talk this through and see what is that about, and try to work to encourage them, in my context, simply to work with a therapist or somebody to kind of talk through some of these things. So that's one place where they might agree, but it's not a good thing. Where they disagree can be, okay, they disagree. It's not a huge issue, or it's not a major, like all the way across the spectrum disagreement. Maybe they disagree a little on something, marginally, and that might be okay. Or maybe they disagree and it's a big issue in the marriage to be. And that could be about any number of topics too. It could be about what each person expects of the other. in terms of helping around the house, or who's going to stay home and who's going to work, and when they're going to have children or when they're not. And she's saying, I'm going to work for 3 more years and have 3 children. And he's saying, are you kidding? I don't want 3 children. We never discussed that before. Oh my God. So it's where you agree and that's good, and where you agree and it's not so good, and where you disagree and it's okay, and where you disagree and there's a problem. Some conversation and working through has to happen. And so I want to encourage you, when you hear the results of the survey, and I'll be here to hear them too, to listen in that way. Because there are things, maybe, that you agree upon that you want to think about. Is this a good thing that we're agreeing about? Are we agreeing about it and it's good for the whole? Or is it something that we agree about that maybe stands in contrast to something else we think we want? Oh. So listen with that in mind as you hear the outcome of the survey. What's true for a couple is true for a community too. This community and the larger community as well. We might not all agree about everything. In society, we don't. We don't in this room, in terms of politics, for example, and we don't in the larger society. So how we deal with difference and conflict is important. And in this community, in a Unitarian Universalist community, one of the things that we want to support is learning how to deal with conflict in constructive ways. Conflict in the sense of conflicting ideas. It doesn't have to be a knockdown, drag-out fight. We're talking about conflict in you believe one thing, I believe another, or we should do this, no, we should do that. That's all. How we deal with those differences matters. Even sometimes more than the issue itself, the difference itself, is how we deal with it with one another, in kindness, in mutual respect. The truth is, I think, and maybe some of you will agree, some of you won't, but we'll do that respectfully. The truth is that we inherit a lot. We inherit a lot as individuals from our families, through the generations, some of which we're conscious of and some of which we're not. We inherit as a community the history of the community, whether we're conscious of it or not. You know, folks who study congregational life say that congregations have people who fill different slots. Let's take the slot of the person who takes everything on their shoulders and is seen as the person. But the person resents it and talks sideways about it and in other directions about it. That's a little slot, a role in the community. Or the person who doesn't know how to connect well from a positive place with others, but knows how to connect or feels they do. The only way they know to approach connection is to complain. That's how some people make friends. They complain about things, and then they join together in the complaint. And then the second person tells the third person, and it's a little different to that person, and it's the fourth person. You get the idea. That can be extremely harmful to a community. But we look at the person who does that with compassion, the person who only knows how to connect through negativity with compassion. But that role of the negative speaker, the negative thinker, the negative connector, that person will leave the congregation someday, one way or another. Somebody else will come in and fill that slot. and so on. You can think of the different roles that exist in this congregation. Those of you who've been around for a long time. The person who never sees anything that's wrong. The person who lives in denial about problems to keep things smooth, to make sure there isn't any level of conflict. That individual or those individuals will leave sometime. Somebody else, some others will come and fill those roles, unless the roles are somehow interrupted. Know what I mean? Somehow interrupted by people looking at it and saying, wait a minute, I've been connecting with people or trying to through my negativity, and it's really not working anyway. Not in the way that I want. I want loving community, and here I am just meeting up with people and we're talking negative talk. I need to look at that. I might need help looking at that, but I need to look at it to change my way, and maybe that can change the role. That might be able to change the role. That can happen for individuals. It can happen for a community. The other thing I think we don't often acknowledge in our lives generally is the role of history more broadly in our lives. The history of the congregation, the history of the city that we live in, the history of the country in which we live. That inheritance, some of which we can be conscious of, and some of which we're not. And different situations in our lives may lead to our becoming aware of some historical influence, and then some things stay buried. You might say some things are better left buried, and maybe that's true, but there's a lot that gets registered in our very bones, literally and figuratively, according to both hard and soft scientists, about the experience of a community, of a country. Trauma is well studied, and those who study trauma suggest that trauma is inherited, among other things, very powerfully. And even if the original trauma was one thing, say one's grandfather was traumatized by war, the grandchild and the child of that grandchild, it goes through to them through conversation or storytelling or even in changed DNA on a cellular level. On a cellular level, we can be changed by good and not good, by trauma, by what goes on in the greater world. But we're often in big denial about it. And it hurts us to be in that denial, sometimes quite evidently, and sometimes we just don't admit it to ourselves. Way back when I was doing AIDS work, quote unquote, working in the AIDS arena, part of my job was to work with people in healthcare facilities who worked there to help them learn about the psychosocial issues of AIDS. And we would work with people who were heads of clinics or from the state office of AIDS, maybe quarterly, and then every week we were all over the state working with different clinics. When we met with the quarterly group, one of the issues we took up was the cofactors of AIDS, and one of the cofactors we asserted was racism, and another was homophobia, that they are actually social cofactors in the development and the spread of HIV and AIDS. One woman was from the South and had moved up here when she was a young adult, now was in her middle ages, and for 4 years of these quarterly meetings, when we talked about racism, she would get very uptight You could see it in her body. And she would say things like, well, I'm not a racist. Why are we doing this? And we'd meet quarterly and we'd do more, and then she said it less stridently. Well, I'm not a racist. How come we're still doing this? I guess some people are. And so on, until one day, maybe 4 years into these quarterly trainings, she burst into tears. She burst into tears because she finally let herself acknowledge on a conscious level something that she knew but was like way back here, that her great-grandparents and her grandparents were slave owners. And she was holding it back. And it affected her. It affected her life. Now, she was a recovering addict and alcoholic, and I don't know if you want to draw a line from that fact to that addiction. It might have been one of the ingredients, though. I don't know. But she carried with her the impact of slavery and, in her case, the specific family connection, and it hurt her. And she recognized that it had been a struggle to admit to herself and to say it out loud. Now, a lot of the people in this room, most of the people in this room are white. Did you know that? I think that's true, but the truth is I don't fully know because I don't think we really know everything about everybody. I think there's probably more cultural and racial diversity in the room than we already think there is. I think that's very possibly the case. It often is. And even in the places where we think we're similar, there's even more diversity than we know. And white people, hey, I'm a white person, right? You knew that, right? I'm a white person, and I know that you don't know much about my background and how similar or different we are ethnically, culturally, religiously, what we believe, and all that. So there's more diversity than meets the eye. But what we really need to know is where we have been harmed and where we have harmed. Not just us, though. See, my people didn't own slaves. So I can't be racist, right? I want you to know I'm not happy about it, but I am a white person who grew up in this society, and I'm a racist. Now here's the continuum. It's not, I am, I'm not. It's like, whew. And part of that comes from what we've inherited. Not just from our families, but from our families and their community, and their families and their communities. And so if you were brought up in the United States, and you're white, and you think you have no racism in you, I would disagree respectfully. So how is that important? As you are searching for a new minister, how is that important? Well, it's important on a few different levels, one of which is being truly open to diversity in terms of race or culture or gender or what have you. We need to look at ourselves. You need to look at yourselves and say, do I have a bias one way or another? And on the 18th, you're going to be here for another after-service wonder, which is beyond categorical thinking. So you can explore some of this as a community, right? You're going to be here, right? Yes! This is good. This is good. I'm taking names. So I should wrap this up, but I want you to consider this little story. I was going down to Big Sur a number of years ago with a friend who I've actually lost track of, unfortunately. But we were driving down to Big Sur and going to Gregory Bateson's house. Do you all know who Gregory Bateson? Philosopher, physicist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You should look him up. Interesting guy. Anyway, we were going down to Big Sur, and he was away, but his second wife was there, Lois Bateson. And so on the way there, my friend shared with me a little story about Lois. She was driving Lois somewhere. They were going north on Highway 1, and as they were going north, a car was coming south, and it was decorated with all kinds of cans and flyers and whatever saying, "Just married." They were just married, and they were driving down through the Big Sur area. And Lois, who seemed not to be terribly inhibited in any particular way, rolled down her window and yelled back, as if they could hear her, but she yelled back, "Love your differences!" There are differences to love right here. And there are differences to love in the people who have not come through your doors yet. And potentially, certainly with the minister who you call to be your settled minister. Remember what Lois said. It's not that it's anything goes. Please don't think I'm saying that, because I'm not. We aren't an anything goes tradition, religion, community. No, no, no. But love your differences. Love your differences. And that means for some of us really working, and as a community, really working on how we honestly deal with difference. People who aren't like us, we think. Make sense? Yes. Okay. I'm going to stop now.